Hi boys and girls, it's me again. I am going to be reading Atticus Claw Breaks the Law, chapter 13. Hope you enjoy it. When the children had finished tea and gone upstairs for their baths, Atticus went out for a walk. He wanted to think about things. After a while he found himself wandering along the beachfront past the shops. The weather had turned much warmer and quite a few families were sitting on the wall eating ice creams. A boy was examining pebbles in the sand while a little girl paddled in the waves. He made his way along the promenade towards the beach huts. To get there, he had to pass the pier. Luckily, a small fairground had sprung up at one end of the car park since his last visit to the seaside. Atticus was glad. He didn't like the blaring music, but at least it made it less likely the magpies would see him. The last thing he wanted right now was to bump into Jimmy and his gang. He skirted the fairground and sneaked past the end of the pier, threading his way round the back of some parked cars. There was no sign of the magpies. When he got to the beach huts, he bumped into Mimi, the pretty Burmese. "There you are," she said. "I was beginning to think you'd never come." Atticus hung his head. "Sorry," he said gruffly. Secretly, though, he was pleased to see her. "You haven't really been waiting for me all this time, have you?" "Of course not. I like coming down here to watch the children." She began to clean her whiskers with a delicate front paw. "Sometimes it gets a bit lonely at home. Aisha, my owner, doesn't have any kids, and she's out a lot of the time at work." "What does she do?" Atticus asked. "She's a florist," Mimi told her proudly. "She owns a beautiful shop in the high street. She has to get up really early to go to the market in Bigsworth to collect the flowers to make into bouquets. Then in the evenings, she delivers them in the van." Mimi sighed. "I'd never leave her, of course, but sometimes I think it would be fun to belong to a family." Atticus said nothing. "Busy week?" Mimi asked, looking at him sideways. "Fairly," Atticus said. "Did you know we were burgled the other night?" Atticus felt his whiskers burn. "Someone stole Aisha's best necklace," Mimi went on. "She was very upset. Her mother gave it to her. It's made of emeralds." Atticus' good ear drooped. "It happened while I was here." Mimi paused. "Waiting for you?" Atticus tried to look away, but Mimi's golden eyes bored into his. "You stole it, didn't you?" Atticus sighed. "Yes," he said heavily. "I did." Mimi stared out to sea. "Do you want me to tell you why?" she asked quietly. "Do you want to tell me why, sorry?" she asked quietly. All of a sudden, Atticus found himself telling Mimi everything. He told her about Monte Carlo and Milan, he told her about Madrid and Montreal, he told her about Moscow and Miami, he told her about the message from the magpies and how he came to be in Littleton-on-Sea. Finally, he told her about the cheddars. "I really like them," he said helplessly, "and I've let them down for a few measly sardines, and it's not just the cheddars, is it? I didn't mean to upset your owner or anyone else for that matter. I just never let myself think about it before. I've been a cat burglar all my life and I don't want to get involved. Now, I'm not too sure." Mimi was quite quiet for a long time. "Poor Atticus," she said eventually, taking his paw. "What are you going to do?" Atticus glanced back towards the pier. He pictured the magpies crowing over their nest full of loot. The thought of Jimmy's cruel black eyes made him shiver. "Well," Mimi said. Atticus let go of Mimi's paw and straightened his handkerchief. He's made up his mind. "I'm going to tell the magpies I want out," he said. "I'm going to tell them what we're doing is wrong. I'm going to tell them that it has to stop. I'll go to the pier tomorrow morning when the kids are at school." Mimi smiled. "And then?" she prompted. "And then I'm going to return the jewellery to its owners. Every single last piece, starting with Aisha." Mimi nuzzled his whiskers. "I hoped you'd say that," she purred. They said goodbye. Mimi waved and Atticus tried to smile. It felt good to do the right thing for once, but it didn't really change anything, he thought sadly. He'd still have to leave. If the Cheddars ever found out what he'd done, they'd never forgive him, and he couldn't forgive himself. He didn't deserve friends like Mimi. or a loving family like the Cheddars. He sat alone for a long time, watching the sunset until it was completely dark. Then he set out for Blossom Crescent with a heavy heart. Once he'd seen to it that everything had returned to normal in Littleton-on-Sea, he would have number 2 Blossom Crescent and return to Monte Carlo, where he couldn't cause any more trouble. Michael and Callie had just had their baths when the doorbell rang. "Do your teeth," Mrs. Tucker ordered, "while I see who it is." The children waited for her to go downstairs, then they crept out of the bathroom and sat on the stairs in their dressing gowns, peering through the banisters. A lady in a pink sundress and floppy hat was standing on the doorstep next to a small bald man with a moustache. He was wearing sunglasses and carrying a suitcase. "We want to talk to Inspector Cheddar," the man said abruptly. "We want to talk to Inspector Cheddar," the man said abruptly. "It's about the burglaries." "He's out," Mrs. Tucker said. "You could try the police station." The woman shook her head. "He's not there either," she said. "He's probably following up on an important lead," Mrs. Tucker said, "on the trail of the burglar." "He'd better be," the man snapped. "My name is Pearson. We were the first victims of that greedy fiend." Callie clutched Michael's hand. "Shall I ask the inspector to call you in the morning?" Mrs. Tucker asked. "No point," Mr. Pearson said. "We're going on a cruise. It's not safe here." He looked about anxiously as though he expected the burglar to jump out from behind a bush and steal his moustache. "Come on, Elspeth. I told you it was a waste of time." He took hold of his wife's arm. Mrs. Pearson shook him off. "No, Stanley, it might be important." Mr. Pearson gave a grunt. "What might?" Mrs. Tucker asked. "I remembered something about the burglary," Mrs. Pearson said. "I think it could be a clue." Michael and Callie looked at one another excitedly. They edged forward. "Did you see something?" Mrs. Tucker asked. "Well, there was a cat," Mrs. Pearson said, frowning, "just beneath the window." "Ugly-looking brute," Mr. Pearson added. "It looked as if it had been fighting. One of his ears was all chewed." Michael and Callie looked at one another. "Atticus?" Callie whispered anxiously. The same thought had obviously occurred to Mrs. Tucker. "Was it wearing a red handkerchief around its neck?" she asked sharply. "Definitely not," Mr. Pearson answered. "Phew," Michael said with relief. "But it wasn't what I saw that might be important, Stanley. It was what I heard." Mrs. Pearson interrupted firmly. "The window was open a little and there was a strange noise outside. It woke me up." She leaned forward. "I think it might have been the burglar," she hissed. "What did it sound like?" Mrs. Tucker demanded. "Well, it's hard to describe." Mr. Pearson looked at his watch impatiently. "Come on, Elspeth, spit it out. We haven't got all night." "It was sort of chattering." Mrs. Pearson glared at him, really loud. She paused. "I know this sounds daft, but..." She lowered her voice. "It was as though someone was laughing at us." "Daft is right," Mr. Pearson said tetchily. "I mean, what burglar would start chattering and laughing just after breaking and entering and stealing all the jewels?" "I don't know." Mrs. Pearson sounded deflated. "I just thought I should tell the inspector anyway, just in case." "Quite right," Mrs. Tucker glared at Mrs. Pearson. "Otherwise, he'd arrest you for withholding information and throw you both in jail. Have a nice trip." She closed the door. "Chattering," she scratched her head. "That's odd." She started up the stairs. Michael and Callie jumped up. They hurried back into the bathroom and grabbed their toothbrushes. Mrs. Tucker reached the bathroom door and surveyed them critically. "What do you two make of all that?" The children tried to look innocent. "Make of what?" Michael spat toothpaste into the basin. "Don't try that on with me, Michael Cheddar," Mrs. Tucker said firmly. "I know you were eavesdropping. Your teeth would have fallen out by now if you'd been brushing them for that long." She bustled them into the bedroom and started to plait Callie's hair. "Well," she repeated. "I don't understand." Callie's the first to speak. "I mean, why would the burglar start chatting?" "It wasn't chatting," Mrs. Pearson heard Mrs. Tucker said, carefully securing Callie's plait with an elastic band. "It was chat-ing." "You mean like the magpies when they tried to steal Dad's badge?" Michael said without thinking. Mrs. Tucker stared at him. "Holy coly, Michael Cheddar," she whispered. "You're a genius!" "Wait a minute," Michael stared at her, astonished. "You don't really think the burglar could be a bird, do you?" "Not just any bird," Mrs. Tucker told him sternly. "A magpie! They're different. I told you the other day they love stealing things. You saw what they're capable of. I wouldn't put anything past them flying around. Burglading houses sounds exactly like the sort of thing they'd get up to after dark." "Are they really clever enough to open safes?" Callie's eyes were round. Definitely, Mrs. Tucker replied. Those magpies are criminal masterminds. You can bet your barnacles. But how do they get in? Michael demanded. Dad said the windows in some of the houses were closed. Well, they must have found another way, Mrs. Tucker rubbed her chin. Something a magpie could get through but a human couldn't. What about a cat flap? Callie suggested, like Atticus uses. Brilliant, Callie Cheddar, Mrs. Tucker shouted. You're a chip off the old block. Magpies, cat flaps, it all fits. What a team of super sleuths we are. She gave them both a bear hug. I can't wait to tell your dad. He'll be as happy as a hake when he finds out we've solved the case. She glanced at her watch. It was 9 o'clock. Now, into bed. You've got your school trip tomorrow, and I'd better go down to the kitchen and meet you at packed lunch. Good night. The children got into bed. Where's Atticus? Callie asked sheepily. He went out, Michael yawned. I don't think he's back yet. Maybe he's gone to catch the magpies. Callie hardly managed to finish her sentence before she fell asleep. Michael lay awake. He wondered if the two magpies that tried to steal Dad's badge really could be responsible for the spate of burglaries, the scrawny one with the hooked foot and the fat one with feathers missing from its tail. If it came to an identity parade, he was pretty sure he'd recognise them again. He imagined them hopping into houses through the cat flap and picking safes with their brakes, then flying away into the night with the jewellery in their claws. If Mrs. Tucker was right, somewhere in Littleton-on-Sea was a magpie nest stuffed with necklaces and bracelets, watches and rings. All Dad had to do was find it and arrest the birds. He'd be a hero. Everyone would be proud of him. The antique fair would go ahead. Mum would have a chance of getting the job she wanted, and Dad might even get a call from Scotland Yard. Michael kicked the duvet relentlessly. There was just one big problem. Dad didn't really get animals. He didn't like them much, and he certainly didn't think there was anything clever about them. What if Dad didn't believe Mrs. Tucker? What if he thought she was being superstitious about the magpies? What if he thought she was being ridiculous? Somehow Michael didn't think he'd be as happy as a hake in the next morning when Mr. Tucker told her that idea. In fact, he didn't think he'd be very happy at all. A few minutes later, Michael heard a gentle thump at the foot of his bed. He felt the mattress sag a little beside his feet and something soft squish his toes, where they stuck out of the bottom. Hi, Atticus, I'm glad you're here. Michael reached down and stroked him. But if I were you, I'd keep out of the way at breakfast time, he whispered. I've got a feeling Dad isn't going to be in a very good mood.